Now, those are my words of way of saying it. You should watch it. And I think to this day, I think it's the best description. And if you read my online book and you listen to Sir James Goldsmith, what they both describe is the fact we knew what we were. In other words, the leadership knew that this would destroy or devastate the West.
So why'd they do it?
That's the $64,000 question.
Well, they hate the West. Defenders of the West. No, I don't think you are.
I think one of the reasons they did it is I think they wanted to create the capacity and centralize the capital they needed to go into space. And I think they knew that they would need every 100 or so years, the central bankers do a reset. And I think they knew they were coming into a reset. And they felt with this technology that they, if they didn't globalize, someone else would, and they wanted to control the process.
They needed the money to go into space?
Mm-hmm. The capital.
Well, I don't even know what that means.
So I think they wanted to build the capacity to become a multiplanetary civilization.
Really?
Yeah.
Spring and summer are here. That's good news. It means you get to go outside and frolic in the sunshine. Unfortunately, there's a downside. Burglars are psyched for the longer days. It means fewer people are home, and that gives them more chances to break in and steal your stuff. This is not our imagination. FBI crime data backs it up. More daylight means more burglaries. That's bad. But there is a solution. You can leave your house feeling secure with SimpliSafe. This is a really cool idea. Millions of Americans use this. It's the highest standard in home security. You get peace of mind every time you leave. So a traditional burglar alarm system of the kind maybe you already have only sets off when someone has already broken into your house. That's not good. Smashed a window, come through the basement door, whatever. SimpliSafe prevents intrusions before they happen. It does it with AI-powered cameras and live professional agents monitoring. It leaves nothing to chance. Plans for SimpliSafe start around $1 per day, so it's not crazy expensive at all. Visit SimpliSafe, that's SIMPLISafe.com/Tucker, and get 50% off a new system with professional monitoring. You get your first month for free. That's SimpliSafe.com/Tucker. There is no safe like SimpliSafe.
Man, I was caught up in such minutia in 1994. I never heard anybody say that. I had no idea that was happening.
So I didn't become convinced of that in 1994. I became convinced.
Were you still working for the federal government in 94?
My company was the lead financial advisor for the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And I was trying to clean up the mortgage corruption. And what I ran smack into is that they were clearly and intentionally setting up the infrastructure to dramatically increase mortgage fraud. Intentionally. Mortgage fraud is a public-private partnership between the New York Fed member banks and the federal government. So the Treasury and the Fed were clearly engineering a massive new mortgage bubble. And essentially, I was doing a series of things. And that mortgage bubble was going to centralize capital. And I was working on a whole plan coming out of the Bush administration. We were taking all our profits and investing in building a software infrastructure that would help communities decentralize political and economic power, but in a way that would create new great wealth. And one of the projects we had was we were working with, I had a subsidiary that had a project working with the top pension fund leaders in the country. And essentially our job was to figure out how the pension funds could invest so that they could handle this baby boomer demographic going through the pension and retirement system. And how we could do it, how they could invest their money because they're operating at such a size that it would be good for America. You know, how do you build a stronger America in a way that helps the baby boomers, live in retirement? And I made a presentation in the spring of 1997 we were at a big money management firm outside of Pennsylvania. And one of the board members was a money manager who worked with a lot of the pension funds. And so we had all these top corporate and state pension fund leaders. And I made a presentation. We had done a simulation of re-engineering the Philadelphia economy to achieve this. And the top pension fund leader looked at me and he said, "Oh my God, this is very similar to what we tried long ago and it didn't work." And I said, "You didn't have the internet. You didn't have the tools to get the average person's learning metabolism high enough, on an economic basis to do that. We had built a data servicing company in low-income communities, and we were able to show how easily we could get the labor force or people on welfare off of welfare and making lots of money and being very productive at high speed." And he looked at me and he said, "You don't understand. It's too late." I said, "What do you mean it's too late?" He said, "They've given up on the country. They're moving all the money out starting in the fall." He said, "You've got to get to Nick Brady." Nick had been I had been a partner at Dillon Read, and Nick had been the chairman of Dillon Read before he became Secretary of Treasury. And at that point, Nick is out, but, sort of involved. Anyway, he said, you've got to get to Nick and let him know it's not hopeless. This can all be turned around. And I thought he meant we, the pension funds, have been instructed to reinvest equity and reallocate our equity into the emerging markets, which made sense because they had a much higher growth rate. What I didn't realize then was, and I realized shortly thereafter, in October of 1997, that's the beginning of the 1998 fiscal year, huge, enormous amounts of money started disappearing from the U.S. government. And literally, by the time of 9/11, there was $4.1 trillion missing from DOD and HUD. And if you remember, the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld stood up and basically said, he did a press conference and he said, there's $2.3 trillion in undocumentable adjustments last year at DOD, and we're missing money, and it's worse than terrorism. And then, of course, I was working with a reporter on a huge story that would have published that Friday after 9/11 about the missing money. We'd been working on it for over a year, and she'd done 9 stories. I'd helped her do 9 stories because we were trying to get the General Accounting Office, now they call it the General Accountability Office, but we were trying to get both Congress and the GAO to do something about it and to try and stop it. And anyway, as you know.
Yeah, priorities changed.
Right.
For reasons that we still don't understand. And
I understand.
Yeah. Well, I don't think the average person, I think, sort of thinks, well, maybe there were 19 guys from Saudi or something.
I call the Patriot Act the Control and Concentration of Cash Flow Act. Because one of the things that happened after 9/11, if you look at the history of the black budget and sort of secret financing that the government uses for secret and classified projects, that pot of money had grown and grown and grown, and it had become very dysfunctional to try and get that money. Mortgage fraud, I believe, was one of the biggest sources, and that's why what I was doing sort of went into the heart of the problem. But the Patriot Act and that whole process was very successful at moving a lot more money onto the budget. In other words, it made it much easier to get enormous amounts of money for the national security state as a result of what happened. Now, whenever you do an operation like this, you stack functions, so it's only one of many goals. But it was very successful.
Boy, it all went right over my head. I thought it was all about Muhammad Atta. I had no idea. I know you're laughing.
I want to tell you my church story.
Wait, hold on. There's so many threads here.
Yeah, it's a lot of threads.
Yeah, there's a lot of threads. I don't want to let it continue to hang in the air, this question of space. You sort of threw that out parenthetically, but I've never heard that before. So you believe, going back 30 years, that people in the U.S. government and in the finance world